Stuart Charity. I'm the Executive Director of the Australian Automotive Aftermarket Association. Independent repair and service businesses right across Australia are facing a number of serious challenges at the moment, including the technological advancement of vehicles, the skills and training gaps, and also the predatory behaviour of the car companies. For these reasons, we believe the time is right to form a truly national group that exclusively represents the interests of independent repairers around the country. And we've done that by forming a group called the Automotive Repair Council of Australia, or ARCA. The main activities of ARCA are to protect consumer choice and competition in the vehicle repair and service market by ensuring that we have mandated access to dealer level repair and service information, and to really put the spotlight on some of the anti-competitive behaviour of the car companies, including their cap price and free service programs, and also warranty confusion and misinformation. One of the activities that we'll be doing is leveraging our relationship with parts suppliers so that we can deliver technical and training nights around the country, and we've also got a number of initiatives in place to start to address the skills gaps in the industry. One of the benefits will be that we'll be doing research to help identify initiatives that can be implemented in ARCA members' businesses to help them improve their profitability and business performance. Well, if you're a progressive repairer that cares about the future of our industry, then you need to join ARCA, and together we'll make sure that there's a bright future for everyone in our industry.
Okay, now we're going to see whether I turn my microphone on. Gee, I got it right, Sean. I got it right, mate. Got it. How's everybody this afternoon? Good? Excellent. Come on, he's been here for every seminar. Yeah, I'm okay. Hey, I'm Colin Bockman. My role is the facilitator of this. I work pretty much exclusively in the automotive industry, mainly in aftermarket sandpit, which is the sandpit you guys play in all day, every day. I love our industry. I love what we do, and I love how we look after customers and we do things that OE don't do. Now, OE are able to put a few blocks in the road for us. Would you agree? Just a few. And in fact, they're doing more and more and more of that. Right now, as we speak, Stuart Charity is having I think the word is a robust conversation with some people on that same matter. Our industry is under significant threat. No question about that. We are capable now with the electronics in the vehicles to put little things in there that just make it harder for us to get to it. Everybody thinks that plug the scan tool in, get the code, solution. No such thing. As you know, it's code, now go look. And how long you look for, and what you look for, and the process and the sequence that you go about is becoming a minefield. Would you agree? How do I go about it? So when I was putting all of these seminars together, and when AAA commissioned me to do so, I wrote down what did I think you people wanted to hear based on my knowledge of talking to you. What were the sort of subjects that you wanted answers to? What we're going to talk about today is the fault-finding evolution. We could do 5-6 hours on this and not even scratch the surface. But what we're trying to do today is just to funnel it down into a couple of areas of thinking so that you can go away from here maybe a bit more aware of what's happening in fault finding, what's happening in the thinking processes, and in two areas in this case. We're going to look initially at what AutoLogic do. Now, AutoLogic is a European-based organisation, got a lot of data, a lot of information, and they've got scan tools that go with it. So we're going to look at their process of thinking and what they do from that point of view. Then we're going to look at the other area which is starting to grow for us, and that's turbos. Now, we only thought turbos years ago for performance vehicles, didn't we? And diesels. But now where do turbos appear? Small litres, passenger cars. I mean, I look at the E-Series Benz and think, who buys a 4-cylinder Benz, E-Class Benz? I can't get my head around it. It's got to be at least a V6 or a V8 because I'm an old-style thinker. But nevertheless, that's what's coming up. Now we're getting 1.5s, 1.2s, and so forth with turbos on them. So that's a whole new ballgame. So there's a little bit of understanding on that today. So we're going to have two presenters. We have a little bit of interaction. First presenter is going to be Matt from AutoLogic, and then we're going to hear from Garrett. I like to call it Garrett Turbos. I get into trouble for calling it Garrett Turbos. Where's he gone? Where's Rod? There's Rod over there. Rod tells me it's Honeywell Garrett. But who in this room knows it as Honeywell? Just a couple of hands. Who knows Garrett as Turbos? Yeah, okay, we got it, all righty. So that's what we know. And as I say, that's just a brand that we know, isn't it? It's like Biro, it's just a brand that we know. So we've got Rod talking on that. That's our session. As far as questions are concerned, if you take my phone number down now, you text me any questions you've got, please. You're ready to write down if you want it. 0418 318 799. If you want a question, just text it to me. We had some in the last one. I was flicking through trying to get them all. If we can answer it, we will, and we'll use it in the interaction. If we get to the point we might want to have some interaction here, we can. Okay, all clear on what we're doing? All happy with what we're doing? Okay, let's get started. Okay, he's already been on once today. But here he comes again. Okay, please welcome Matt from AutoLogic.
Thanks, Colin. So just to carry on from what Colin said about AutoLogic, we are predominantly Euro brand vehicles on our diagnostic tool and offer a support service that is, I would suggest, or hazard a guess, that it's second to none in the aftermarket world. So Colin asked me to talk about how we go about fault finding on today's vehicles. I'm going to start from the past, go into the present and talk about the future, and then right at the very end of the presentation I'll go through a fault report that I've pulled from a Mercedes SLK 172 and kind of show you how difficult it is. But if you know what you're doing or you seek advice on what you're doing, it does become a bit clearer and does save you time. So I'll begin with the history, as I said. Believe it or not, the Bosch Dejectronic was the first module back in 1968 where you could physically scan the module. Very, very limited information from that module. Certainly from fault codes we didn't bother with. It was more of a physical manual way of diagnosing. Then in the 80s, GM introduced the ALDL protocol, pre-OBD2. It's possible to command flash codes from these. So how many of you remember bridge-in circuits to get flash codes from modules? Yeah, those were the days. And probably maxed out about 40 codes from that module. So again, very, very limited and not really much use to us. And then in 96, obviously, OBD2 came into play because of the California emission regulations. And then EOBD, European Onboard Diagnostics, 2001, so that's petrol vehicles. And then in 03, we got the diesel vehicles. So OBD, onboard diagnostics, is a very basic fault code for emission-related issues. So we went from the 1980s from one ECU to over 70 ECUs on today's cars, the BMWs, the Mercedes, Range Rovers, Jaguars. They're absolutely fully loaded with modules. Door modules, seat modules, steering column modules, instrument clusters, engine ECUs, transmission ECUs, four-wheel drive ECUs, rear diff lock ECUs. They're just all over the car these days. So diagnosing problems with those can be very, very daunting. So just to go back to the OBD, I want to talk about the difference between a generic code and a manufacturer's code. A generic scan tool will pull a generic code from a module. Okay, so that's used in the J1979 standard, and you will get approximately 2,600 codes from that using the generic code. A manufacturer-specific code is where the manufacturer has added to that generic code set, and they set their definitions. So they can have a code that's specific to their vehicle. And that code is much more accurate with the fault that's on that vehicle. So it's much more of a pinpointed fault code that's reported, whereas a generic code is much more vague. So a generic code will cover many more sensors and circuitry, etc. The Mercedes S-Class, which is their flagship, has 229,000 possible manufacturer's fault codes in that car. That's the difference between what a dealer tool can extract and a generic scan tool can extract. So it's pretty frightening. A lot of the other brands, probably not quite as much as that. This is one that's really right up there at the top. But it gives you a good indication. So pre-network systems where modules really, they just communicated through solid lines. There was digital communication, but it was very slow. The cars had a lot of wiring to be able to do that. And that was basically the downfalls of pre-network systems. And the advancement of technology meant we had to move to network vehicles. Infotainment systems these days are so advanced. The engine ECUs need to talk to the transmission. That in turn needs to talk to the diff. The diff needs to communicate to the park brake module, and the whole lot needs to talk to each other, basically. So we moved to what we all know as CAN bus. So it's, again, developed by Bosch and went into the BMW, was the first car to receive that, which is a controller area network. We also have LIN bus, local interconnect network. Another form of network between modules and essentially used on peripheral systems, but I'll talk about that a bit later on. Again, infotainment system, it generally uses most ring, media-orientated system transport. It's fiber optic, because when you're sending navigation images around the vehicle, you need to do it at a speed that is usable. And the only thing that can really do that is fiber optic. Bike flight, which was generally for, I think Mercedes may have had it, but predominantly BMW used bike flight between the engine and transmission, or transmission and the shift systems. And they're more recently used in FlexRay. And the manufacturers will basically choose that network depending on what systems they're fitting into the car and the specification requirements by the manufacturers of the components. But what it means to us is it becomes more and more complex in trying to find faults on the vehicle. So just to quickly brief on this, because I do need to talk about this so you understand the quick test report. That's essentially a schematic of a CAN bus network. So high speed or medium speed, they basically would look the same. So at the end there, you've got your two termination resistors. Most of the time, they actually put those into a module, and that becomes the termination module. And then you'll have the CAN nodes, the node being basically the ECU. Okay, so a node is a computer term for an ECU. And each node will have its own address or identity. I'll just go back, sorry. So you've got two wires there through the system. So red would be the high speed, the high side of the CAN. Blue would be the low side. Effectively, they switch in an asymmetric pattern, and they should be switching identically for digital form. So LIN bus it's a single line. Again, digital signal, mainly used for peripheral modules. So things like on there, door mirrors, door locks, window control, climate systems, including the automatic climate control motors that are on the blend door motors or the heated systems. They will all be connected via LIN. Steering wheel controls, seat positions, etc., all using LIN bus. Doesn't need to be particularly fast, needs to be fairly robust and relatively cheap. Hence why we've got LIN bus. Okay, then we've got the most ring. That gives you an idea of what the most ring would look like. That is exactly what it is. You have a gateway module, which is the master module. From there, the fiber optics will be connected in series to those modules, and you'll have light that is transmitted from the master module, and it's pulsing to send the data. Okay. FlexRay is similar to CAN, but if you just imagine that where you've got a single CAN wire, that's the twisted pair, FlexRay would have two sets of wires. And it can send data down either sets of wires, which makes it more fault tolerant, because if you have one set of wires drop off or get cut or damaged, it can still continue to operate on the secondary. But the advantage of FlexRay is the speed. It's incredibly quick. It's 10 times faster than CAN. So it's something we're probably going to see a lot more of in the future. So that was a kind of quick reminder about the network systems that we're seeing today, and we'll go on to talk about the quick test report or the fault report that we get from the vehicles. But what we need to do is, when those cars come into our workshop, we need to have an approach to that diagnostics. So ECUs connected on network systems broadcast the data around the car. Okay, we all know that. So if using a generic scan tool reader, be aware that the fault displayed will not be as drilled down. I've spoken about that already. What does a GP do when you go to the doctors for a diagnosis? What does he do? Well, we do that sometimes as well. Normally they sit you down and they start talking to you, don't they? Relevant or not, but they actually have a strategy, a procedure to try and understand what's wrong with you, depending on what you're reporting to them. And it is as follows, okay? And we can apply this into vehicles. I believe we can. Whether you choose to or not, it's up to you, but I believe we can. And I do have this method in my diagnostic approach. And that is pattern recognition. So we need to understand the history of the patient. We need to understand the history of the car. Has the fault been happening multiple times in the past 6, 12 months? Has it been okay for 6, 12 months, but 2 years ago it did the issue? We need to know that history. Self-labelling. Patient may tell you what they perceive to be the diagnosis. Well, to me, that's the customer. They bring the car in and they tell you what's wrong with it. And it can rub us up the wrong way, but quite often they might be saying something that might be of great value. So you have to keep smiling, grit your teeth, and try and pick up on key words that they're telling you, because they may help you speed up that diagnosis. So the presenting complaint is the physical complaint. What can you physically see on the car? And that spot diagnosis is basically through your experience from what you see and all the other bits of information that you've got, you're now able to make a diagnosis fairly quickly. Okay, and that's essentially what a GP uses, that strategy, when he first, or he or she, talks to you in the medical room, wherever it is. They will follow that strategy initially. It will go on from there, goes a bit more in depth, but that's kind of the procedure they use. So what we need to do is we need to get the facts. Now, I'm a big fan of Sherlock Holmes, and all of these quotes are from Sherlock Holmes, because no end of times I see technicians, and I've been guilty of this in the past as well, many years ago when I was in a workshop. You jump to conclusions, you start making things up, and essentially that's what we are. We're investigators, and an investigator can't jump to conclusion. He focuses on the facts. So we're not only doctors, we're investigators, and we're paid a lot less than those guys. But we can still apply the same theories. So it's a capital mistake to theorise before one has data. Insensibly, one begins to twist facts to theories instead of theories to suit facts. How true is that in the auto industry, in the repair industry? I never guess. It's a shocking habit, destructive to the logical fault. I tell that one to the wife all the time. So this is the one that I really do like, and I did work for a vehicle manufacturer a few years ago on their global diagnostic department. And we were basically supporting the global dealership markets. And this would be sent around the DTS and around the global diagnostic support teams because, it's so relevant to what we do. And that is when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must only be the truth. All agree? So that's about as far as I got reading books. How many of you, just put your hands up, how many of you have a diagnostic procedure in place? Yeah? So not many, really. Not many. We should have a diagnostic procedure that we follow every time a car comes in, particularly if it's a complicated one. So this is one that I've put together, and it's one that I generally follow, and this is interrogate the customer, the three W's: what, where, when. Gather some information, interrogate the customer, because they are key to capturing the facts to quickly diagnose a fault. And the dealerships are doing that these days. The dealerships are definitely spending more time talking to the customer of the vehicle to get more information. That's particularly helpful when it's an intermittent fault that that isn't present when the car's given to you in the workshop. The second step is for you to verify that fault. You've got to prove what they're telling you is correct. Then we would run the fault report, or quick test is what AutoLogic call it. We run the quick test, and that is where we go off and we hit a button and it just goes off and it pulls all the information from all the modules fitted to the car and gives it to us in a report that we can read. Then we look at the facts in the report. We don't jump to a conclusion. We're pulling the information from that report, because that's essentially measuring the heartbeat of the vehicle, isn't it? That's essentially what it's doing. It's giving us detailed information about what's going on within those networks that we can't see. But we have to know when to ask for help, because if you don't know the answer, you will spend many, many hours going round in circles, pulling your hair out, and not achieving anything, not going anywhere, but wasting your time and spending your customers' money, which essentially becomes difficult to prove and charge them for. So, how many of you, and I've probably skipped the slide too soon, but how many of you go into a module and read the fault specifically from that module? Yeah, so we just go into the one module, we read the fault code. We don't know what's happening in the other modules. We might go into one, come out, go into the other, come out, go into the next one. That's what we used to do years ago, pre-network cars. There was no other way. On pre-network cars, we had to go into the individual modules and read it. But on a network car, we do not do that, because we need to see the big picture. Faults will cascade. So, for instance, if you've got a sensor that's failed, for like a brake pedal switch failure, that's inputting to the ABS module, but the engine ECU, the transmission, the ESP, whatever, is looking for that brake pedal switch information. So what will happen is, because the ABS hasn't received that, it's now broadcasting information around the car to say that that message is missing. And it will start to log fault codes in multiple modules and can become very confusing. So like I said, we want to see the big picture. We want to see what faults are stored in that vehicle as a whole, and what modules are communicating or not communicating. So there are different types of fault reports. Does anybody know what they are? Do you want to shout them out if you know what they are? So if I say, if the code begins with P, what's that relevant to? Powertrain, great. B? Brilliant. C, I've gone too soon. I've given it away. I'm getting excited. Okay. So chassis, and U for basically network communication. So that's communication between modules.
Sure, U's not unknown.
Well, it can be mistaken for unknown. So this is the car that we took an example test case to show you about now. So the car came in, the symptoms are pre-safe warning on cluster. The cooling fan runs at high speed during startup, then goes off after 45 seconds. Eco stop start does not work. Okay, so your pre-safe message is in the dash like so. What repairs have been done? Well, nothing's been done. We've cleared the faults and retested, and after 4 hours, the same faults came back. Brilliant. We've just charged the customer $150, whatever it is. We've now really got to fix it. So we did an individual module fault read. So we went into the engine ECU because the fans are running permanently, and we extracted this code. Now, what you've got here in the AutoLogic tool is the code right over there. I don't know if this has got a laser on it. It might have a laser. That code there, that's the manufacturer's code that he uses. This code here is the ISO standard code. So P059777. That there is telling you that message is stored. That code is stored. And this is the fault description. We also get the part number of the module, and this is telling us the variant of ECU fitted. Okay, so the coolant thermostat is an electrical fault or open circuit. What do? We test it or we just throw a part on it most of the time. We've still got the same fault. Because we think we've diagnosed it, but actually we haven't seen the big picture. And what we really need to do is run the complete fault report, and that is the fault report off this car. There's actually 2 pages. I'll go on to the second page. But you can see there's the fault code at the top. We've now got these cascading fault codes, CAN communication, one or more messages. And when I see this on Mercedes, I'd run out the door. It's frightening. You see it all the time on Mercedes. They have so many codes in there. And you look at that and you go, well, how on earth do I decipher that? What do I do to work out what's wrong with this vehicle? Okay, this is the second part, the fault report. I couldn't get it all onto one page. So, a couple of things to tell you. So, stored fault codes. This is where the fault code could be pending. So, when you've done the drive cycle, the ECU's flagged the fault, but it's not to the extent where it's current. It's not bringing on a light necessarily relevant to that specific description. It's actually telling you, look, you've got a problem with the car, you need to look at it. So that's what the stored code means. And those stored codes on a Mercedes, they can be flagged up to 45 minutes after the ignition's been switched off. Okay, so not as soon as the ignition's switched off, you might have to leave that car for an hour and then go back and do your fault report to capture some information. Current and stored means there is definitely a current problem that's happened and occurred during your drive cycle. And you also get sporadic as well, which is, the fault has occurred and it is current, but it's then been fixed. So with this car, we're going to check the hard codes. So the hard codes are the P codes, the B codes, and the C codes. The U code is not a hard code because that's a communication code. So that's just relevant to software. So we're looking for P, B, and C. And what we pulled was, first of all, the coolant thermostat as an electrical fault or open circuit. And then in the front right door module, current and stored, low voltage. Okay, and then we also pulled a third hard code, which is an event internal control unit reset is being performed. Does anybody know what's wrong with this car? It's the battery. The battery is the problem with this car. Because basically, when the car's gone to be started, so it's picked up in the right front right door module that it's got low voltage, yeah? Doesn't necessarily give us the answer. But when you go to start the car, because it's got an event there, that event means that it's just occurred, and an internal control unit reset is being performed because the voltage has dropped to such an extent the module's shut down. And now it's trying to reboot again. And that's why your eco stop starts off, because your battery voltage is not where it needs to be. And that's relevant across anything with stop start, actually. How are we doing for time? Yeah, you want me to? Does that? I think that's it anyway. Does that answer everything? Does it help you?
Okay.
Good.
Let's just quickly have a look. Hey, everyone. Let's just quickly have a look, though. The battery was at fault. But did you find out why the battery died, or was it just dead and old?
Probably that it was old. I don't know the answer to that.
Did you need to look for that? I'm not suggesting you're wrong or right. What I'm saying is that's how complicated what we're doing is. You're still going to find it with it. It's like when you go to the doctor, you see the doctor, gives you a pill, doesn't look at the cause. That's how they keep you coming back. Okay.
I see what you're saying. You would take the battery and...
Got to make money somehow.
So you do the same. Don't worry about it, right? Okay, thanks, Matt.
No problem. Thank you, Colin. Thanks, guys.
Get going just a minute. Thank you. Quick story to set the scene before we move over here. My son's got a 530i, okay? Says, Dad, battery's going flat. I said, son, smart move, Go get another battery fitted. What does Sun do? Waits until it dies. That's what they do, right? Unless Dad's looking after the car. Comes back to the airport, battery's died. What does he do? 1 o'clock in the morning, rings for her and pays twice for it. Dad, I got a new battery fitted. Cost me shit a lot, right? It cost me a lot, right? I said, oh, good. I said, have you had it recoded? What do you mean? Well, the batteries talk to the engine and the management system. It's going to be recoded. Oh, it'll be all right. It's working. You put a bigger battery in. I said, that's even more reason. Dad's got a bigger battery in it. More grunt. So, of course, weeks later, Dad, battery's going flat. I said, well, did you ever work out why it was going flat in the first place? I thought it was just old. Do you know? So we go in, scan tool, no, AutoLogic, not used properly though. And what happens? Oh, we're not sure. So we go around to the auto electrician, spends 5 days around there, right? Out comes the radio, $5,000 for a new one. Or $650 for a second-hand one, and if it don't work, we'll give you another one. You like this? Put it in, $1,100 later, 2 weeks later, battery's going flat. So I go down to BM Auto Works. He plugs in. Now listen, guys, I'm just being rude, I'm being honest. He said, have you let an auto electrician touch it? I said, yeah. He said, shit. So he plugs in the scan tool, says, mate, tell you what we're going to do. We're going to go around the back here. We're going to put it, does he use his Bluetooth? I said, no, he doesn't use the Bluetooth, doesn't care. So I'm going to pull it out and put a little optical loop in it. I'm going to put it back in again. He said, I reckon I'm going to solve your problem, because that's what the scan tool's telling me, because that's what the fault codes are telling me. Reset the battery. Never had a problem since. That cost me $250. Instead of $1,100. Now, here's the question. Where does Travis take his car to have it serviced from now? Pretty much. Takes the BM Auto Works. All right. Why I'm telling you that is because I'm just a customer who've experienced this. And so therefore, once you've got that satisfaction, you get linked back to that. So our role is to be bloody good at telling the customer what we're doing and explaining to them and showing them the value, and then that's how we win them. You can actually win customers, have them pay for the privilege of being totally satisfied. By being good at diagnostics. Let's move now to our new world. Our new world of what's happening with turbos in the vehicles that you're dealing with all day, every day. What are the key faults and what are the things to look for? So please welcome Rod here, Rod Stafford from Honeywell, Garrett, I'll say it right for him, from Garrett to talk to us about that. Thanks, Rod. Thank you.
I'm just going to build on what Matt's been talking about, obviously. Just to explain, Honeywell has been the parent company of Garrett for quite some years, so we're just moving the brands around a little bit and making people more familiar with Honeywell than they have been in the past. But having said that, that's not why we're here today. Just looking at the modern era of fault diagnosis, with the scan tools, very necessary diagnostic tool these days. Can't live without them, basically. A vital tool for any workshop. However, from a turbocharger point of view, we have a number of issues, and the main one is that people tend to take the code as the be-all and end-all of their fault diagnosis when it comes to turbo systems. They see the code come up, they replace the turbo. In most instances, the root cause isn't identified. So the turbocharger could be perfectly good. This seems to be overlooked by a lot of workshops. So the importance of complete troubleshooting, and that includes diagnostic with the right scan tools, is extremely important. Now, the fact is, unfortunately for us, turbochargers get blamed for pretty much everything. Right? If you get a flat tyre, it's the turbo's fault. You know? A large proportion of the turbos, as I said before, are removed unnecessarily. There's nothing wrong with them. And even those that are removed, because they're damaged for some reason, that's quite often as far as people look. They don't look to find out what the root cause is. They just see damaged turbocharger. All right? More often than not, that damage is a symptom of a deeper issue. Turbos very, very, very rarely fail on their own these days. And that sounds like bragging, but it's not. It's a cold hard fact. All right. So much of the surrounding engine system adversely affects performance and durability of the turbocharger. That goes leaking pipes, issues with the ECU system and the sensors that are basically giving it its various signals. We've got to keep in mind too, in the modern turbocharger, a lot of them are now directly controlled. The speed of the turbocharger, performance of the turbo is directly controlled by the vehicle's ECU. They're not as independent from that system as they used to be. So on all of these particular models we see here, they have some degree of electronic control. That's a petrol engine turbocharger with a wastegate on it, which is commonplace, except this one is electronically controlled by the ECU. This one here, small diesel passenger car, VNT system, variable nozzle. That little section there, the little electrical box on the side, that is controlled by the vehicle's ECU. Same on this one. This is electronic over hydraulic, and the oil that's fed through this is engine oil, but it is controlled by the vehicle's ECU. So if you have problems within that ECU system, 99% of the time it will affect the turbo somewhere, like airflow meters and that sort of thing particularly. Misdiagnosis of turbocharger issues. Well, turbocharger is affected by pretty much everything surrounding the engine, from the condition of the engine itself to exhaust systems, particulate filters, air filters, intercoolers, pipes, oil drain systems. They all affect durability of the turbocharger and performance. Clearly identify root cause is what we are pushing here, from scan tool right through to the skill of the mechanic, the diligence of the mechanic. The turbocharger can be damaged or its performance affected in many different ways. Poor maintenance, air filter intake systems, wrong or dirty air filters, contaminated oil through metal particles, water, fuel, soot, dirt or dust through air induction systems, sludge in the sump, which is usually associated with fuel contamination or soot, burnt oil carbon-like deposits. And quite often those burnt oil and carbon-like deposits aren't necessarily in the sump, they're in the oil supply line itself, and the oil's just been cooked in the line and slowly closed it off. Damaged, poorly maintained engine. Incorrect oil change intervals is a big thing. People tend to stretch their oil change intervals and they use cheap oil, and that directly affects the life of the turbocharger. Any contaminant that gets in the oil, that gets something up into these metal oil lines and is cooked, because in a lot of cases the oil line is very close to the exhaust manifold, and there's enough heat radiated from the exhaust manifold to slowly cook the oil and the contaminants in the oil inside the pipe, and it causes a lot of damage to turbochargers. Clearly identify root cause. ECU system sensors cause problems. The MAF sensor is a fairly common one. If the MAF sensor for some reason loses sensitivity, it's not sensing the actual airflow through the system, well, the ECU is not given a signal. Just say for argument's sake there should be 300 CFM of air going through that engine, and the ECU is only given a signal to say there's 200, then the ECU tells the modern turbocharger to speed up. And then you get to a point in some instances where it exceeds the design limits of the turbocharger. So your scan tool, you plug it in and it tells you there's a faulty flow meter possibly. But the ramifications of that are that you've oversped the turbocharger and it's already damaged. You might have worn out thrust bearings, you may have even caused some stretching of blades and fatigue of compressor wheel blades, that sort of thing, all because the airflow meter is not telling the ECU to tell the turbocharger to do what it's supposed to do, what it's designed to do. It's actually overperforming or overspeeding. Particulate filters are another issue. That also relates to the bottom, wrong one. The bottom passage there, vehicle not fit for purpose. That's a fairly common one, and one of the issues that you see if the vehicle's not fit for purpose is particulate filter issues. If a diesel engine doesn't get up to operating temperature and the particulate filters don't burn off, they clog up with shit, right? The performance of the engine is deteriorating. You actually quite often get noise out of the turbocharger because the back pressure in the system is actually forcing exhaust gas out of little clearance holes that would normally not have any pressure against them. And it sounds like a turbo whistle noise, but it's not. It's a block particulate filter that's caused the back pressure in the system. So they quite often pull the turbo off because it's making a noise. And there is a noise coming from the turbo, but it's caused by something further downstream. And again, probably nothing at all wrong with the turbocharger. As I say, quite often none of the things I've mentioned there are considered by a mechanic. Even when a turbocharger is replaced, it is damaged for whatever the reason. We also have an issue where people whip a turbocharger off, shove another one on. They do not look at the ramifications that may occur because of the amount of damage to the turbocharger. And if you see a turbocharger that's had 50% of the compressor wheel blades missing, where have those blades gone? They don't look. They just put another turbocharger on, bolt the air filter system on, away they go. Doesn't even get out of the workshop. And all the shrapnel that's gone back up into the air filter system comes bouncing down and back through the new turbocharger. It sounds ridiculous, but we see it all the time. There are so many examples of that sort of situation, not just on air intake, but one of probably the most common is blocked oil supply lines. We recommend when you're doing any turbocharger change, always replace the oil supply line because 9 times out of 10 there's a certain degree of carbon build-up in those lines that will eventually block the oil supply off sufficiently enough that you'll block the oil supply to the turbocharger and the bearings will be damaged. You know. It's very, very common, particularly on older vehicles or vehicles that are not maintained correctly with correct oil and correct oil change intervals. Very common, especially on second and third hand vehicles where people have bought these things and they don't look after them. The older the vehicle, the more often you should change oil, not less. And people don't think of that. So yeah, check oil supply, check oil drain line restrictions. Replacement of oil feed lines is recommended. Look for any residual oil collected in intercoolers. That's another important one. We see a lot of guys whip turbochargers off because they're leaking oil. Again, maybe it's the turbocharger's been damaged by something. Maybe there's nothing wrong with it at all, but there's some sort of issue in the system that's causing a crankcase pressure situation. Well, if you've got crankcase pressure, the turbocharger will leak oil. Even if it's a brand new one, it will leak oil. The seals in a turbocharger are not positive seals. So if there's any back pressure in the oil drainage systems, leaks oil. When it leaks oil, it fills up the induction system. Quite often, and I've done this myself, I've pulled an intercooler off a commercial vehicle, this was, and it actually weighed about 8 kilos more than it should. It was full of oil. Problem is you put that turbocharger back on again, you start the engine in, that oil is going to go into your induction system. Diesel engines run on oil. You ever seen an 11 litre engine do about 15,000 revs until a rod comes out of the side of the block and you can't control it? Man, that's a bit of an experience. GMs work really well, don't they? Sorry? GMs work really well. Yeah. The one I saw was actually UD, but still, yeah. So correct diagnosis is extremely important. You can't take things on face value. Scan tools will point you in the right direction, but you still need a skilled mechanic, skilled, well-trained, experienced mechanic. These are all things we find within turbochargers, and they will all pull up a fault code telling you that basically the turbocharger's not working, but none of what you see there is a direct result of a turbocharger issue or a turbocharger component failure. They are all a symptom of a deeper issue. Right? Obviously, you've got contaminated oil there. Well, the turbocharger doesn't contaminate its own oil. It just can't do it. That's for an object damage, and so is this one here. I've come across it many times, particularly with aftermarket air filters, well, cheap, nasty ones anyway. And I've had a few guys that have bolted these things in and they haven't checked to see whether they've seated home on the seals, and they've left like a 4mm gap underneath the air filter, and a couple of k's down the road, particularly on four-wheel drives when they've been going down the dusty roads somewhere, all falls apart. And that's the sort of thing that's been happening. So again, turbocharger gets the blame because they don't even think about the air filter. They just put a brand new one on. Why would it be wrong? You know? This is another thing we see quite regularly. Again, people say, oh, the nut's fallen off the end, the shaft's broken. Well, it has, but that's probably only because you've driven it for about 400 kilometres after the initial damage to the turbos occurred. And that damage is probably caused by blocked oil line or some other internal issue that's affected the turbocharger. Those shafts don't break on their own. They usually break because the bearings have been damaged by something, then the wheel smacks against the housing, and these things are doing 120, 130,000 revs a minute. So there's quite a bit of force, and that's only a 5mm shaft there, so it will break. But it is a symptom of a deeper issue. One of these other issues here has probably happened first. This one here, lack of oil. Or in some cases, you can actually get a very similar symptom with overspeed. As I said before, if your airflow meter is not sensing properly, turbo speed is increased by the instruction from the ECU, and you get that burning of the thrust bearing. Not usually quite as much burning because you're still getting oil flow, so you're still getting a cooling effect, but you do get the similar sort of damage without the blackening around the outside of it. So, and oil leaks. If a turbocharger's leaking out of both ends and you can't see any real physical contact of wheels within the housing, or the wheel against the housing internally, there's a good chance you've got a crankcase issue, whether it be a worn engine or a blocked breather pipe or something of that nature. A turbocharger very rarely will leak oil out of both ends without some sort of influence. I'm not saying turbos don't fail at all, they do, but it is, in this day and age, fairly rare. And we all know the cost of incomplete diagnosis, the financial loss for all concerned, wasted labour, unnecessary purchase of parts, repurchase of parts as undiscovered root cause damages a second or third turbocharger. And unbelievably, we see that regularly when people don't listen. We had an instance just 2 weeks ago, actually. The owner of the workshop did the right thing. We recommended that the oil feed line on this particular application be replaced. It was dry as a bone internally, the turbocharger that they'd taken off it. It had been on there 150,000 k's or something, which isn't old for a diesel motor, as we all know. But the turbo was dry. There's no oil inside it at all. So we've told the owner of the workshop to replace it. He's gone ahead, he's ordered the pipe, he's given it out to his guys in the workshop. They've fitted it all up. He thought all was well, but what he didn't realise is they've ordered the oil feed pipe off the wrong model vehicle, and the mechanics decided he doesn't need it, he's going to put the old one back on. Little did the owner of the workshop know that this had happened until the owner of the vehicle picked it up. He got about 400 yards down the road, left the vehicle there, and wasn't very happy when he got back. So, so as I say, complete diagnosis is the only way to go. There's a high risk of doing damage. As I said before, if you've ever seen an engine run on its own oil, it's quite exciting. But if you run a damaged turbocharger, there's a good chance at some point you're going to destroy an engine. And we all know if you upset a customer, he never comes back, so no return business, and that hurts all of us. All right? That's a fairly basic presentation. Anybody got any questions or...
I got those. Okay. Right? Okay. You getting something out of that?
Yeah, the last thing I had to say basically was if you're not sure about something, we have a group of independent distributors around the country. Although we are an OE supplier, we're the biggest OE supplier of turbochargers in the world. We have 14 manufacturing plants spread throughout the world. in all parts of Asia, America, Europe, all over. We cover every bit of land in the world. But here in Australia, we're an aftermarket support division. We've been here for 40 odd years now, and we have a group of independent distributors, and within those distributors there are people that are able to diagnose root cause for you if you're not sure. That is within the turbocharger itself. So if they pull it apart, they'll pretty much be able to tell you what to go and look for on the engine. They might give you half a dozen possibilities, but they'll give you some direction before you do damage to another turbocharger or another engine or whatever it might be. All right?
Well, you still have to, I've just got a text question, you still have to warm down a turbo?
I'm an advocate for if you've been on a long trip somewhere and spent a fair bit on time on the expressway at high speed and everything is really, really hot, then I'm an advocate for letting it run for a few minutes before you turn off. But it's less necessary than it used to be because most turbochargers now are water cooled. Yep. But now, to me, it's a safety factor. Like all these truck drivers you see parked on the side of the road, they're doing it for a reason. They always run their engine for a little while before they shut down. They just cool the whole system down. And it actually goes a long way to prevent the build-up of burnt oil deposits within the turbocharger and any of the supply lines that go to the turbocharger. If you can drop that temperature out of that exhaust housing of the turbocharger, it will help the turbocharger survive longer. And most people think you turn the thing off, okay, it's cooling down. But the peak temperature in the oil area, the oil galleries of the turbocharger are not reached until after you turn the engine off. Because when you turn the engine off, you stop the oil supply and you stop the water flow. Or you get a bit of thermal siphon from water, but both of those are doing cooling to the bearing surfaces and the internal cavities of the turbocharger. Once you turn those off, the heat from the exhaust system and the exhaust manifold can soak back through there, and slowly but surely it will carbonise the oil or contaminants in the oil and build up. It's like when you burn the chips in the frying pan at home. If you do that 100 times, the layer gets thicker and thicker and thicker. It's exactly what happens in a turbocharger.
So, Rod, what are we heading towards with all the 1.4, 2-litre turbo, mum's taxis, etc., run the kids to school? And the same as we have the issue with the diesel and all the diesel Sorrentos and so forth, and their turbo diesels. What are we heading for in the petrol, mum's taxi, and the diesel in the, I mean, I know the particular filters and so forth, an issue with the diesels, they do little short trips and so forth, and out it comes the back. But what are we heading for these guys from a diagnostic point of view when mum's taxi comes in? It's done 100,000k, 80,000k, and she's got, what sort of problem might there be with the vehicle? They might go, hang on, mum's taxi, stop, start. What are we looking at? I don't think I should have asked this question.
Rather depends how the vehicle's been treated. If the wife drives down to the shops at 200k an hour, then slams on the brakes and rips up the handbrake and just hops out of the car and the whole thing is glowing red hot, that's not doing it much good. Short repeated trips, if they don't get too hot, probably not too bad. But if the thing's up to temperature and it's doing short trips 10 times a day, then you're decreasing the length of time that carbon build-up will take to cause a problem in the system. But if you're maintaining the vehicle regularly, that helps a lot. We find a lot of people are not changing oil often enough in turbocharged cars, particularly those that do short trips, right? And particularly those that are getting older. They try and save a bit of money here and there by using lower quality oil, cheaper oils, and not doing oil change often enough, and that detracts from the life of the whole system.
Okay, we talk in terms of interrogating the customer. When a customer comes in with a fault, we interrogate them. Now, we've got to be careful how we use that word, but that's really what we're doing. So we're carefully asking questions to identify their circumstance and how they got there. So
we all know customers are angels, though. They're never doing anything wrong.
No, I know that. And it was always somebody else that drove the car. But when we start to think about in the past, we'd ask questions about mechanical faults and mechanical problems, and we'd ask questions that made sense from a mechanical point of view, hard part mechanical point of view. Now we get into this area where we've got more turbos in different environments, when their performance was different. So is there some thinking that we need to have in this diagnostic process of thinking? That when a person comes in and we've got like the female, we might say, I shouldn't pick women, but ladies taxi, right? But and you say to her, okay, well, let's have a look. Tell me if I'm on the track here, though. She comes in and what's going to be the fault that she's going to say this thing's to? Is it going to be sluggish, or what's it going to be if there's a fault that's occurred because of the style of usage of the vehicle? It hasn't had the oil changed regularly enough, etc. What might be a fault? Just give me one. What might she say?
Oh, the common ones are low power or noise.
Okay, low what?
Low power.
Low power. Okay, low power. She comes in and says it's got low power. You can imagine a lady walking in, driving the car, the turbo's not working, it's got low power. She's diagnostic the whole bit. But at that point, is there a thinking, okay, I've got to think to myself, has this been person doing short loads, they've been doing long loads, they've been coming off the freeway and stopping? What sort of questions do we need to start thinking about, given we've got this new era of vehicle coming into play? Like I know a friend of mine's daughter's got a little 1.4 turbo just bought, and I thought, I wonder what's going to be the difference there, how they use it. Is there a series of questions or thinking that we need to have because of the environment's changed? Would you ask questions?
It doesn't
about
really help you. Sometimes you just got to have a look at the vehicle itself. The customers are not terribly helpful. Well, if you ask my wife anything about a car, she wouldn't have a clue.
Yeah, but if
it doesn't go, it doesn't go.
No, correct. I mean, my current wife, she had a turbo, and I said, well, how did the turbo blow up? She said, well, it made a noise, and I turned the radio up. Yeah. The noise went away. You know,
but it happened 2 weeks ago, but I've been living with it.
Yeah, that's right. So anyhow, what I guess I'm driving at here is that if we're to get into this new world, especially, let's go to diesel. What are people going to come in and say about their diesels because they haven't used them the way a diesel should be used? Every third day, trip down the freeway, burn off, and so forth. What are we going to say to them? What questions are we going to ask?
Well, you just have to ask usage, oil change, their service practices, whether they get the thing serviced or not, because they'll always tell you they do, but...
go look at the service.
Yeah, really, at the end of the day, you've got to listen to them, but at the end of the day, you've got to have a look at the vehicle yourself, because unfortunately, you can't always trust what a customer tells you.
Correct.
Right? So, we have a policy, and I'm sure a lot of you here do, is that when it comes, particularly on turbocharged cars, don't test drive them.
Got it. There's a point.
If the customer wants to show you what the problem is, you sit in the passenger seat and let them drive. Right?
Because it might already be stuck.
Because if something goes wrong, if the thing's already damaged, there's already an issue. They want to test drive it, right? Then there's a good chance while you're in the car, it's going to destroy itself, and you'll get the blame.
Okay, good point.
So, never test drive a car. If you're uncertain, do some rudimentary checks. Pull the induction system off, see if there's any wheel contact inside the turbocharger. If there's not, there's a good chance that the turbocharger is in reasonable condition, and you may think then about test driving it. But yeah, be very, very wary, because if a turbocharger does happen to fall apart, it's already badly damaged, and it just happens to fall apart while you're doing the test drive, you're going to get blamed for that, all right? Or you could do, as I said before, you could do further engine damage and cost yourselves a lot more money than necessary.
Thanks, Rod. Thank Rod, please. Thanks, Rod. As you guys know, I don't do what you guys do. I play on the peripherals here. But I try and work out how do we need to communicate to the customer. And I spend a lot of my time and energy working out what's happening, how we need to communicate to the customer. Here's the message I'm hearing from these guys, from Matt and from Rod and so forth. I'm hearing the message that says, when a car vehicle presents, like you presented a doc, when it presents, we've got two issues. As Jeff Smith from TAT says, we've got two issues. We've got electronics, we've got environment. And we've got to ask the customer questions about the way they drive it. Now, they see it as interrogating, and I've used that word. So here I'm going to give you some tips. Use cushion questions. In other words, so I can better understand how this might have occurred, just need to get an idea of how often the vehicle has been serviced and by what method. You've got to build your questions. Okay, thanks, that helps. Now, some people use their vehicles for short runs, some for longer runs. This can actually impact on how I go about looking at what the problem is. Now, get my thinking? This could impact on how I go about looking at the problem. As soon as you talk about how I go about looking at the problem, what do they think about? The meter ticking? They start to give you a more accurate answer. So when you think about how you ask your questions, think about how you ask the questions because they want to give you an accurate answer. Because the more accurate answer is going to cost them less, they will give you an accurate answer. So when you use a cushion like, by the way, that's not a question, that is an inquiry. By the way, have you found that it's been making the noise first thing in the morning or later in the afternoon? By the way, have you found it's making when the engine's hot or when it's cold? Now, if you really want to interrogate someone and get an absolute answer and get the perfect truth, and you know the person's name, and it's Mrs. Jones or something, you say, Mrs. Jones, tell me, now watch this, Mrs. Jones, her name, tell me, is the cushion, did you notice this first in the last 2 weeks or was it longer than that ago? She'll go back and say, well, it was when Johnny went to school, when he had this play, and that was on, she'll tell you the exact right answer. Now, there are some times when you need to get the customer to tell you exactly what you want to know so that you can take that information on board. Now, here's the magic sentence that you use after that. Don't know if you're writing this down or not. Here's the magic sentence you use. Once they've given you all the information, and if you're going to do all these things I talk about, remember this sentence. Based on what you've told me, this is what I'm going to do. Now, do you get that? Based on what you've told me. Now, if you want to add to that and fluff it up a bit, like me, say, based on what you've told me and giving them my evaluation of that, with my expertise and my training and my knowledge, right, I'm going to take this approach. Now, watch what happens when you say that. Based on what you've told me, I'm going to take this approach. I'm going to take it for a test drive with you in the driving it. I'm going to come with you and experience it. Then when I get it back here, I'm going to look at physically what's been happening. Then I'm going to look at electronically what's been happening. Block, block, block. And at that point, we'll decide what diagnostics is needed and what fees will be appropriate. All of a sudden, you'll hear, well, maybe it started a couple of weeks ago. With me? Because all of a sudden, bugger, I've got to tell them the truth, otherwise it's going to cost me crap loads. Now, that's what we're dealing with. We've got to play mind games with our customers. Is that fair? No. It's just the way the world is. Customers are becoming more and more and more trained on what to say. So you never ask a direct question because you'll get a direct answer. You don't want that. Okay? So think about it for the guys in the room here. Think about when you want to ask your wife, can you do something? Not that. That's definitely off the cards. When you want to ask your wife, can you do something? You actually think about it for a matter of time before you even construct the question, let alone ask it. You might even think about it for days. Not only will you think about it for days, you'll wait for the opportune time. You may even prime the opportune time to get the most amount of receptiveness. Am I making sense? Because you know what outcome you want. You aren't going to get it, but you're going to try anyhow. Now, that's what he's thinking. What I'm driving at is we put a lot of energy sometimes in thinking about how we're going to ask questions when it's really important to get the right answer. When the customer presents with a vehicle today with a fault, be it turbo or be it a fault, we've got to start rethinking how we ask the questions. I can tell you right now from my research in doing this, it's all about how you start it as to how it finishes. It's not about over here, it's about how it starts. The more accurate information, there's a guy sitting over here just a little while ago called Morris Donovan who's got a place called All Autos in Geebung in Queensland. Lovely guy, don't know if you know him or not, Tatman. Really lovely guy, knows his stuff. He over-interrogates the customers. He tells me I over-interrogate them. They get annoyed answering the questions. Okay? I said, Morris, you're a great guy, and I know you're asking. Let me give you some hints on how to ask the questions. Because that's the only difference. He just needs to rephrase them. He's going, you do what? So you've driven it for 4 hours, right. Now, how long? And the person's thinking, shit, what's the right answer? See, that's the other thing you've got to be aware of. You got to be careful how you ask the question. The customers think, what's the right answer? Because if I give the wrong answer, it'll cost me more money. So we're playing mind games. If you took somebody who's really good at asking the questions, but not so good at fixing it, that person will actually be busier and making more money than the guy that's good at fixing it, in many cases. That's not fair, but that's the way it is. So out of today and out of our fault finding, what we wanted to get you out of it today is to think, when you go away, I need to ask the right questions, I need to take the right procedure, the right drop-down boxes, I need to understand that certain things are happening now, the parts are talking to each other, as I talked about in one of the previous sessions, and we've got the things like the turbos now. I love what we were talking about there, Rob was talking about there, about the turbos hardly ever falter. There's always something else. It's either the oil or whatever. And my turbo has done 180,000 K. I got a GT4 Group A Celica, it's my toy, right? But I change the regular oil regularly. Okay, regularly change the oil. And I only use, I've been using Redline and so forth, but I only use the best of oils, and I change the fluids in my cars regularly. So I'm hoping that my turbo is going to last. And when I take it for a flog, I don't do that. When I have taken it for a drive which happens to have made it warm, and I bring it back, I always let it hide that little bit, but not too long. So, but I'm a concerned driver. Mrs. Jones, in her 1.4 litre turbo, has not got a clue what's underneath the bonnet. And worse than that is Mrs. Smith in her turbo diesel taxi. So that's what we've got to be aware. Sell your value. Gee, I'm glad you brought it to us. We've been doing these for quite a while now. There's a lot of research happening in that. Now, let me ask you some questions based on my research and my knowledge. Let's see whether we can narrow this down quite quickly and find out the fault so it doesn't cost you too much. Is that person going to answer your questions then? You bet. Thanks very much for coming to the session today. Hope you've got some value. Did you get some value from the session? Okay, excellent. Thank you. We'll see you at the next one. Thank you.